All right, today we're going to be making a cream ganache. It's super decadent, super sophisticated, super simple way to make the center of a bonbon or a truffle, or maybe to pour into a tart shell to make a really easy, simple, blow you away tart. And it's a very versatile, very flexible recipe. So what do you need to get started to make a good cream ganache? Well, you're going to need cream, and I have 4 ounces of cream pre-measured here. You're going to need chocolate. And for this, I'm using 8 ounces of Crow and Moss 70% chocolate. Very neutral flavored chocolate, very chocolatey chocolate, not one strong flavor one way or the other. So it's good for a wide variety of ganache recipes. And in this case, I'm going to add a little bit of flavoring. My little bit of flavoring will be cacao juice. So we're going to be making cacao juice truffles. So what do you need to do? Well, you're going to go ahead and grab yourself a bowl. Pour it in your 8 ounces of chocolate. Now there are lots of different ways that you can do this. And you notice that my chunks here are tempered big discs. The smaller these pieces they are, the easier it is to melt. For me, I'm not going to worry about it too much, but you can chop it if you want to. You don't have to chop it, just makes it melt easier. For me, I like to do the 8 ounces of chocolate, 4 ounces of cream, and I like to pour them together cold and then heat them in the microwave. If you want to heat them on a double boiler, you can. You want to heat your cream separately and then pour it on top of your chopped chocolate. If you do that way, if you heat your cream separately, then you need to have much smaller chocolate chunks, because I find often the heat of the cream is not enough to fully melt my chocolate, which is sort of what you want. You don't want to get your chocolate mixture really, really hot. So for me, this is going to go in the microwave for 30 seconds to a minute. Check it. After that, it only goes in for 15 seconds at a time, and I'll show you what to look for. All right, so you can see after 45 seconds, if you're doing it this way where you're heating the cream and your chocolate up together, you do not want your cream necessarily to boil. You just want to get it hot, because you don't want to overheat your entire mixture, which is one of the reasons why some people will boil the cream and then pour that onto the cooled chocolate to reduce the total temperature of your mixture. In this case, you don't want to bring the cream up to boiling. You just want to get it hot enough to melt. And like I said, I left mine in a little bit bigger chunks. They could have been a little bit smaller chunks, which would have caused it to melt a little bit easier, but I'm not super concerned at this point. So what's actually really important is using a whisk. A whisk helps you mix your ganache with a minimal number of strokes. And so you can sort of see mine starting to come together here. And I can still feel there are some big chunks in there, and that's okay. It's okay if at this stage you have a few big chunks left over in your ganache, because you do not want to overheat it. So some of those chunks in there are going to be what you want. All right, so you can see a few of them right in here. You can notice it's not perfectly smooth right now. That's okay. But you can see a little bit of a chunk there. And so what I'm going to do now that it's mostly mixed is I'm going to gently reheat it just for 5 seconds at a time until it's fully incorporated. Then I'll come back and show you what it looks like when it's fully incorporated. Okay, so I just did 5 more seconds in the microwave, and I'm going to give it a good whisk here. And you can see now that I have it really fully incorporated. There aren't any chunks here. It just took a tiny, tiny bit more. And my temperature is cooled way down. Now, if I were just going to leave this right now, you can sort of see that it's not a perfectly smooth emulsion. This would probably break just a little bit. You can see how it sort of pulls away from the sides there. So that's the cocoa butter coming out of the mixture. So you're not going to have a really good ganache, and that's called a broken ganache. That's one of the risks that you have from over stirring, or in this case, from not having quite enough liquid for our percentage of chocolate. As the percentage of chocolate goes up, the amount of liquid that you need also goes up. So what I'm going to do now is I have 2 ounces of something else. So it could be 2 ounces of more cream. It could be 2 ounces of a liqueur of some sort. It could be 1 ounce of liqueur, 1 ounce of cream. In this case, I have 2 ounces of cacao juice. So I'm going to go ahead and put about half of that in and slowly whisk that in. Now this will add extra liquid, and it will bring my ganache back into mixture. And I've let it cool off just a little much. Now it's coming around just fine there. You can see it starting to incorporate here. I had a little bit of trouble getting it incorporated there right at the beginning, but look how nicely that's come together. And I'll go ahead and pour the rest of it in. And I'll just work in nice, even strokes all the way around. And you can see why it's good to have a little bit bigger bowl than you think you might need, to give you room to really get that whisk in a good circular motion. And now just look how nice and uniform. Work really slow. Now you'll notice sometimes I did get a few air bubbles in there. That's one of the dangers of using the whisk, is getting a lot of air bubbles in. But I just find it makes it so much easier to incorporate, and a few air bubbles I don't mind in my ganache. All right. If you go a little bit slower, you can see if you keep the tines completely in contact, that does limit the number of air bubbles that you get. But you can just see how nice that looks. All right, now at this stage, we're pretty much done. If you're filling a tart, if you're going to do something like this, you can take this immediately and pour it into your pre-baked tart shell and let it set. If you want to scoop your ganache using a melon baller, you can just let it set up in this pan or in my bowl overnight is going to be best. Do not refrigerate it. You want this to set up slowly. You want the crystals to form slowly, so that gives you a nice smooth texture. And the refrigerator often causes the crystals to be too big. And then when it's cold, it's really hard to scoop because it's so hard. So let this set up overnight at room temperature, and then you can scoop it out. Or actually what I like to do is I like to let it set up just a little bit till it's thickened around the edges, give it one quick stir, and then I just scoop it like that, and I'll scoop it onto parchment paper. Depending on my timing today, I don't know if I'll be able to, which method I'll be able to show you. We'll see if it's set up enough before I have to go today to show you the one method. Otherwise, I'll come back tomorrow and we'll scoop these guys. And like always, the best part about mixing this guy up is, of course, licking the spatula. You always, or the whisk, you always got a spatula is easier to lick. And so you can use a spatula as well, but licking the whisk is always the best part, I think. Most people think cacao juice tastes like chocolate, but it's the most tropical sort of something that I could ever imagine, really. It just tastes tropical. So now I have a tropical ganache here, cream ganache. And so again, 8 ounces of chocolate, 4 ounces of cream, 2 ounces of some other liquid for a 70% chocolate, which is approximately 8 parts to 6 parts. All right, we'll be back in a few hours, maybe tomorrow. Thanks. All right, it's been about 2.5 hours at about 68 degrees, so I thought I'd show you what it looked like just as it's starting to set up. I actually like scooping it and shaping it now before it's fully crystallized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make a couple truffles, a couple centers out of this right now. Then we'll let it sit overnight, and then we can compare and see what it's like in the morning after it's fully crystallized, because the making of ganache is not just a cooling, it is a crystallization of the cocoa butter, forming that firm, melt in your mouth, super, super smooth texture. So I have a melon baller here, and it works really well for scooping out your ganache centers. And so you can see how it started to set up really nicely there. It's really nice and firm. All right, and so then I just take a scoop, and you can see how it's soft. Go ahead and stick it on my parchment paper. Go ahead and take another scoop. You can see how nice and soft this is for making your truffles, making your centers. And if you were going to make this for, you could make this as squares if you wanted to cut, if you happen to have a guitar at home, or you just want to make some layers. You could do it that way, but you would have poured it into a frame right as it was mixed and let it set up, and then you would let that sit overnight to let it really firm so you could cut it with a knife and it would hold its shape really well. And now these balls that I'm scooping out, the ganache that I'm scooping out right now, you can see is really soft, but now they'll crystallize in the shape of a ball pretty close. So tomorrow, it'll be really easy to shape them into the exact ball shape that I want. Right, and I can just keep on going and going, and this will end up making about 40 to 50 of this size truffle. I'll just finish off with 12 here. Right, and you just go along. And that's all there is to it. All right, my ganache has sat overnight, and you can see that it's fully firmed up, fully crystallized. You can see where I scooped away some of the truffles from yesterday, some of the ganache from yesterday. And then you can also get a look of those that have set up pretty well. And now we'll go ahead and, the reason to let it sit overnight, there are a couple reasons why you'd let it sit overnight. One is if you wanted to pour it into a pan and cut squares, or whether you're making layers where maybe you're gonna put a fruit pate over the top or something like that, you'd want it to firm up overnight so you could cut it. The other is just because maybe you wanna make it and it's easier to just set it overnight and deal with it the next day. So once it's firmed up, we can go ahead and scoop these out here. You can see they're a little bit firmer, but you can take that scoop and we'll drop it right on the tray. It's really not that hard. And you can see the consistency of the ganache here. Come on out of there. I'm just going to do a couple here. And the melon baller just helps you portion everything really well. So that's good enough for now to go on to the next step. So we'll go ahead and move that aside. And then once either you've scooped them the night before or scooped them the morning of, it doesn't matter. What you're going to need next, unless you're tempering chocolate to do a coat on, to put a seal on the outside. Next, the simplest way, especially at home, is just to put some sort of simple coating on the outside, which could be cocoa powder, could be crushed nuts, could be shaved chocolate, could be any sorts of things that you could just roll your truffle around in. I pretty much exclusively go for rolled in cocoa powder. The only difference between rolling something in a cocoa powder or a crushed nut and tempering it and putting it in a hard shell really is the shelf life. So when it's encased in a hard shell, the air is not able to get into your truffle and it has a much longer shelf life than if it is just air, it has access to it. So you can see this is the one I just scooped. What I'll do is I'll just go ahead and gently roll it in my hand till it's about round, drop it in the cocoa powder. Then I'll take one of the ones that I scooped yesterday. And the reason why I like to scoop them the night before, again, you can see here, is really you have a firm, I don't have to roll it, I just have to press it because it's already set up. It's not been freshly scooped. You can roll it if you want to, right? And you're just gonna drop them in. I find it's a little less messy to deal with it here, and I can get all my dishes clean and everything like that, so it's a little less to deal with today. We'll go ahead and drop all these in. I'll do a couple more of these that are that I scooped today. See, one of the things you want to be careful when you scoop it is if you have those air pockets. We're going to try and make sure we don't have air pockets in our truffle. Not that they'll necessarily last very long. Now, if you do want to let the ones scooped the next day, so these ones here, you could leave these for an hour and they would firm up and be just like the ones that I scooped yesterday. Now, this cocoa powder that I'm using is a Maru cocoa powder. And here it is from Maru Provisions in Vietnam. One of the things when I first started doing this, before I started tempering my own chocolate and I would roll it in cocoa powder, is if you've ever tried store-bought cocoa powder, you put a little bit on your tongue or whatever, it's so strong and bitter, you have to fight through the cocoa powder to get to whatever is on its covering. When you start dealing with really high quality natural cocoa powder, and you can get really good cocoa powder from Valrhona. I have it from Ascanosi. I have it from Maru. A lot of places make really good natural cocoa powder. So let's just try a little bit here. So it has some fruitiness, it has some darkness, it has some earthiness, not at all bitter. It's mixing a little bit with the ganache that I have on my finger to really enhance the sweetness, enhance the chocolatiness of what you're getting. So we're going to go ahead and we have the in my bowl here. We're just going to roll them around. That's all it takes. And look at that guy right there, right? That is a fun truffle. Here's one that's a little bit rounder if you want it a little bit rounder. Now, one of the things that I'll do is I'll grab my box here. So as they're finished, I'll scoop them out. I don't mind if a little cocoa powder goes in there, because what will happen is the cocoa powder will absorb into the surface of the truffle a little bit, and you'll get dark spots. So I like to keep a little bit of cocoa powder in whatever I'm going to serve them in. I'll scoop them out here. All right, so there we go. Got a little set of 7 truffles there. Go ahead and stick my lid on, and I'm ready to go. All right, so some of the questions that you might have about making truffles is some of the troubles people have will be with your ganache breaking, adding a little bit of spirits, adding a little bit of extra liquid, heating it up just a touch will often bring something back into emulsion. The percentage chocolate, you're just gonna have to experiment with the percentage chocolate that you're using and the amount of cream that you're using. You can make butter ganaches, you can make coconut milk ganaches, you can make a lot of different ganaches out of all sorts of different things. It's just this mixture of chocolate and your mixture of whatever liquid it is they're using, or some other fat. And that's it. It's really very, very simple, very, very decadent. I suppose this is the chance now. I didn't try one, right? That's the whole point of doing these things, is so I get to make extra stuff for me to try. So 8 ounces of chocolate, 70% I have here, 4 ounces of cream, and 2 ounces what I put in was the cacao juice from repurposed cacao, or repurposed pod. You can see it's firm, but sort of that instantly melting, very smooth. Now the fruitiness is really coming on. It's sort of a tart, tangy, very interesting taste from the tropics, but you can see nice texture here. My truffle, very thin coat of the cocoa powder, but it's just enhancing that chocolatey flavor. It's not taking anything away. Super simple. Eat them within 2-3 days. Don't keep them in the fridge unless you don't have air conditioning in the summer, and share them, enjoy them. Easy to make. Thanks for watching.